Welcome back to Practice on Water, presented by Share Practices. My name is Matt Garino. I am here with my lofty in stature co-host, Alex Sharp. How you doing, Alex?
Doing great, Matt. How are you?
Have we talked about enough on this show that you are 6'7",
No,
and your weight is 245?
Yep, that's a fat joke. I'm offended, but okay.
No, it wasn't a fat joke. I was just about to actually compliment you and say that we could plug you in tight end of the Patriots tomorrow. I don't think they'd miss a beat.
I don't know about that, dude. The foot speed in my 30s is not what it was in my 20s.
Tight ends don't have to be that fast.
That's true. Just got to be bulky.
Yeah. Anyways, we're back with Brandon. This is part 2. If you guys remember from last week, he bought a practice in January, a smaller office, $500K, where the hygienist up and left right after the transition. So he is, still hitting the Cavitron hard, and hopefully have a new hygienist here soon. And he has some good talk with Suzanne this week about some ways that he's going to get to his $1 million goal for the end of next year. So Alex, do you have anything else to add before we kick it to Suzanne and Brandon?
I think Suzanne was thinking it, but she didn't say it. Like, Brandon would make a really great coaching client because he is mind ready. He sees where his deficiencies are. He sees the current limitations of the practice that he acquired, and he's willing to put in the work to do it. Like, he makes no bones about it, because Suzanne offers some really, in his face critiques of what he's doing well, what he's not doing well. And he takes it on the chin and acknowledges it. And he's like, hey, let's roll. Because there's a lot of great specific action items that Suzanne lays out in this episode. And if Brandon has the good sense to listen, he can get to that $1 million practice.
Absolutely. And if you're Brandon listening or someone in a similar practice, please reach out to us and talk to Suzanne about how we can help, because taking practices, doing 500 to $1 million is something we do all day, every day at Share Practices, and we would love to help. So visit our website, please reach out. All right, well, let's kick it to Brandon and Suzanne for part 2.
Welcome back to another episode of Practice Underwater. I have Brandon here with us today as part 2 of our episode. How's it going, Brandon?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you. So let's remind the listeners about a little bit about our conversation from last week in terms of giving them a reminder on the practice purchase and your current situation.
Yeah, so I bought the practice at the beginning of this year, January of 2021. The practice historically was doing about $450,000 to $500,000. We're roughly on track to match the production. The difference is that whenever I bought the practice, the hygienist that was there for a few years decided that they were going to get a job closer to home. And I'm pretty short-staffed at the moment and trying to hire the correct team members to put them in place so that the office can continue to grow.
Okay, excellent. So share your short-term vision for the practice. And for those of you who may not have had a chance yet to listen to the episode, I suggest you press pause at this point, go back to last week, listen to last week's episode to get all the details, because we had a great conversation about goals here. So remind us.
So I would like to see the practice double in revenue up to $1 million practice by the end of next year, 2022.
Okay. Lofty? Do you think that's lofty?
I think it's reasonable.
So increasing hygiene will definitely add. Now, what we also need to work on is making sure that all of those other opportunities are explored, right?
Right.
So briefly, last week, we talked about marketing. Let's start there. Okay. You said you started working with Swell and you just put Swell in place.
Yep.
Okay. Good job. Increasing the new patient flow sooner rather than later was your idea was to wait on this. My idea is no, let's move forward with this because you mentioned June, July, and in a couple of days it'll be June for sure.
Right, yeah.
Around the corner. So let's get working on this. It does take some time to gain some momentum in that direction. So, everything marketing wise on the Swell side and the online, all of that, as well as just encouraging your internal referrals. Right? New patient experience, all of that. So another reminder here to the listeners is that we're adding, you said 4 days of hygiene, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And we have pretty much a full schedule, right?
Yeah.
For hygiene going forward, for what? Couple of weeks, couple of months?
I would say it's probably a couple of months out. The only issue is that a lot of times people reschedule pretty commonly right now. It wasn't as bad whenever I was first there, and it seems that it's gotten worse over the past month or so. At least I've noticed it. An uptick of rescheduling about a week out compared to whenever I was first there.
Okay. So your vision by the end of 2022 is to double the practice, and I know I've said that a couple of times. So I'm really being adamant about note taking here on how you're going to do this.
Right.
Just hygiene alone it's going to impact the practice in a very positive way. But I want you also to be focusing on specific areas in the practice now that you'll have a little bit more time to do that.
Right.
I started off by kind of addressing the issue of you having time with patients now, whether that was on you doing their hygiene visit, or if they were a new patient to the practice with like a limited exam or whatever, you've had time with them. And while the ratio of patients that are actually in need of treatment and that you're diagnosing isn't low, where I'm seeing case acceptance, especially on the new patient side, being low.
Correct.
So your goal is going to be to pinpoint all of the areas where you can begin to make some changes and course correct so that it has an impact on your case acceptance. Right?
Okay. Right.
Okay. Now, the more patients you're going to see in hygiene, of course, you're going to have the opportunity to diagnose on them. But guess what? You won't have a full hour with them to impact their decision to say yes. So really honing in on how you're going to communicate that with a value, as well as with a sense of urgency, is going to be high priority. Okay. So I'm going to take a step back here and talk about how having a hygienist now in the practice is your communication with that hygienist and sharing what your philosophy of care is going to be important.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that we know that the hygienist is going to impact in terms of metrics? Right? We're going to be looking at perio ratios. We're going to be looking at fluoride. We're going to be looking at what the dollar per hour is,
right?
In terms of production per hour, all of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at those areas now,
they're not existent.
just so our listeners know, he's giggling right now. Okay, so this is the hard part, right? To recognize the areas that, okay, but the good news is we're pointing them out and we're talking about them together, so we can make a difference here.
I knew that this was an area that needed to be worked on in the practice for sure.
Awesome. You've done a great job at self-diagnosing those areas.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now we have to take that to the next step. Self-diagnosis is one thing, and now doing something about it, mm-hmm. really executing on that is intentionally is the next thing. So it's almost like, I bet you have a lot of listeners here. Our doctors are kind of saying, wow, I wish I had a clean slate. Like I could, start with a hygienist from scratch, and we build the practice together that way and be able to communicate with that hygienist without any preconceived notions here or, baggage and background. This is how we want to treat our patients. And this is the level of care, that is based on my philosophy that I want to provide. And doing that from the get-go is going to be very important with your hygienist.
Right.
So the two of you sitting down and ironing out all of the things like, when do we take x-rays? At what frequency are we going to do this? When do we deliver fluoride? Like how do we talk to the patient about fluoride? When are we going to talk about this? Perio, what's your philosophy around perio? What qualifies that? What your expectations are? And I think if you set the right expectations for this hygienist, man, this tag team will be genius.
Okay.
But the ball's in your court when it comes to that, because you've got someone that is looking to you for guidance, right? She's a new grad.
Right.
And so you can have a great positive impact on this hygienist where things can soar. Do you have an intraoral camera in the practice?
We have two, but they're both in the hygiene rooms.
Okay. So you're going to have her utilizing that.
Yes.
And,
correct.
and kind of working on co-diagnosis from the get-go.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay. That way, your exams, you won't have an hour. You're used to a long period of time now and building a relationship. That's going to be a change for you.
It's going to definitely be different.
Mm-hmm. You're going to have to run in and make an impact in a shorter period of time. Right? So getting into your routine and having her help you with that as you're shifting toward a longer appointment and now impacting a patient's decision to say yes to dentistry, I think that's going to be a challenge for you.
Right.
Okay. And so adding those 4 days immediately, I completely agree. And making sure that her mind is on appointing ahead. I mean, this is where the rubber's going to hit the road, right? This is the true tale of our ratio of appointing ahead and whether or not this stays. So that'll be the challenge. I'm thinking you're going to come back on our show in, a couple of months and tell us how all that went. And we're going to look at those stats again and make sure that you've set the bar very high. So that has to continue. Okay. And then let's talk about hiring on the assisting side.
Okay.
Okay. So you have a part-time assistant and you are now faced with a situation where you are doing some procedures that don't require assisting.
Right. Yep.
I'd make the recommendation sooner rather than later, place an ad, start hiring a full-time assistant.
So you think I should go ahead and get a full-time alongside the part-time assistant, or just a full-time assistant?
So I say get a full-time assistant, and your part-time person, does she have any desire to work at the front a little bit and the back a little bit, or is she basically...
She's okay with working at the front, but she doesn't want any additional hours. I've tried that, and I have somebody that I had an ad out for an assistant for about a month ago, and it was hard to fill a part-time role, and I was just unsure if I should just go ahead and hire a full-time assistant to have another body in the office. So that's kind of the dilemma that I was in.
Yep. So now you're going to essentially double the number of patients that are coming through the door, right? Mm-hmm. And while you now have like someone that's a jack of all trades at the front that runs to the back to help you assist and all of that, it isn't an effective use. I'm sure, a lot of balls that get dropped because she's trying to juggle them all at once.
Yeah, there's definitely phones that get missed and things of that nature.
Sure. And you could miss a new patient appointment. Mm-hmm. Right? That you've just spent some dollars on marketing. So let's keep her in one seat, as they say, and make sure she's able to take care of the phone and the insurance and all the other areas that she should be taking care of. But at the same time, and treatment planning, by the way, because you will have likely a lot more coming out. So we're going to need her for treatment planning.
Right. And
you could have either this full-time assistant that you're going to hire or the part-time assistant help with some tasks at the front.
Okay.
If we're talking about the easy things that we can have someone be responsible for, and not necessarily, whoever has time, come and help. I mean, I would assign a specific task and say, okay, whoever is the better individual to handle that or is more comfortable, say, handling that. I would say there are a couple of things that would for sure be on that plate, which would be reactivating some past due patients that you haven't seen yet, right? That were part of the practice that you purchased. You need someone to be doing insurance verifications, because now we're going to know if fluoride and all of these other things are covered.
Yep.
And the hygienist is going to be able to take care of that.
Right.
So if we're adding things like really solid and consistent insurance verifications, reactivation, the phone is ringing more often now because there's double the number of bodies walking into the practice, as well as you marketing, it will be important to have a backup. Okay. So we said hygienist for 4 days a week, and now we've got a full-time assistant.
Yep.
And so depending on who you hire, you mentioned in last week's episode, important to find the right people and get them in the right seats. I agree with that. I will say the floater position, and I've said this before on the podcast, the floater position is the hardest position to fill, in my opinion. And it's hard for someone to be great at it all. Okay, the chances of getting somebody that's that well-rounded, I'm not saying they're not out there, but it is a little bit harder to find someone that really loves to do both of those aspects and are great at it. Right. However, there are some things that we need to do at the front, and the person that you have currently isn't able to take care of those. As the practice grows, you definitely will need, 2 full-time assistants for sure.
Right, for sure.
So it depends on how wonderful this part-time assistant is and whether or not she wants to transition to some kind of a role at the front. But what she has to offer and what you actually need eventually may not match. Right? But for now, getting a full-time assistant and then deciding which of the 2 assistants is actually going to have some role to play at the front as backup to your front office team member currently, I think is important.
Okay. Yeah, I have somebody that I interviewed, and she wanted to be with us, and she would have been a good fit, but she didn't like the hours that I was offering, but if it's a full-time position, then I think that she'd be a good fit. So I'll probably give her a call tomorrow then.
Okay. No time like the present, as they say, right?
Exactly. Yep.
This episode is brought to you by Swell. So all of us who are already using Swell know that it crushes reputation management. It's like turning on a steady stream of reviews that requires no effort from your team and just works. It's amazing. Additionally, it makes it easy to stay in touch with all of your patients before and after their visits. And it even has a great way to set up a virtual waiting room. But there's more good news. Swell has a brand new version of their platform. And on top of being simpler than ever to use, you can now actually get patients to pay via mobile, which is incredible. The reason that Swell is so effective at getting reviews is they make it easy. They've now brought that same ease of use to paying for dental treatment even after patients have left the office. Mobile payments are a great way to text them a reminder so they can pay at their convenience right on their phone. You can pay via credit or debit card, ACH, or even Apple Pay or Google Pay with just a few taps. No more phone calls, no more chasing people down with emails and letters that always seem to get lost. And it gets better. This new release includes Swell Schedule, which is an easy way for patients to request an appointment time that works for them, so you can lock down those appointments quicker. Listen, Swell is one of those things that you just need to try it out, turn it on, see the results, and then you're converted and you're like, well, I'm never going to shut this off. Listeners of the Shared Practices podcast can try Swell for free for 30 days. No commitment. Just set it up, see the results for yourself before you pay anything. To take advantage of this offer, head to swellcx.com/sharedpractices. That's swellcx.com/sharedpractices.
I will bet also that the cancellations and no-shows that you referred to, you said there's been some changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're going to be thinking about proactively and reactively. So let's start with the proactive approach. really having the hygienist communicate what that next step is with the value, right? Every week I say, let's present this with value so that the patient understands why they're coming back in 6 months. What's the reason? Just because everybody tells me I have to see my dentist every 6 months? Or is there a reason why I should be coming back? And it's not just a quote unquote cleaning, right?
Okay.
So your hygienist is going to present value, and that's the proactive approach there. We're going to appoint a head. And on the reactive side, if somebody is calling to cancel their appointment or to make a change in their appointment, you actually have someone answering the phone that can deal with that situation in a way that isn't, making it too easy for them to change their appointment. Yeah. So having her have the ability and the time to do that and to support you and your hygienist as you build value in the back, she's supporting that up front,
right,
is important. So see what I'm doing? I'm building value for for additional team members, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's been one of the bigger issues is that we do make it pretty easy for people to reschedule right now. It's not necessarily an urgent thing that they get in, so they feel like it's okay to reschedule 2 or 3 weeks out rather than coming in that week for their appointment.
Sure. And I bet they leave a message on the answering machine, like someone probably doesn't even have a chance to impact that at all. The phone rings, patient wants to change their appointment, it goes to voicemail right now. And we react to the fact that we can't even be proactive in this approach, right? We just
definitely happens.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely need someone there. And look, to further drive home this point, you have, which we haven't necessarily addressed fully, is that 724 patients.
Okay.
So currently, your active patient base is just a little over 700.
Okay.
That is very close to one full-time hygienist 4 days a week, right? You have that many bodies that are at least have been seen once in the last 18 months.
Okay.
My fear is if we can't get to them, we can't answer the phone quickly enough, or we can't get to them by reaching out and saying, hey, it's been a while since we've seen you.
Right.
Many of these patients that you purchased along with the practice, they don't have a tie to you, right? So,
right, exactly.
Unfortunately. So again, we do need someone to be able to make sure that that's happening. You're doing a good job at appointing ahead, but now we're going to take it to the next step, appointing ahead with value, not just appointing ahead. So we try to reduce the idea in the patient's mind that they're actually not going to come in 6 months.
Okay.
So we talked about these, very poignant and strong, I'm going to use the word strong, areas that of focus, right? Because your goal is, I heard you say by the end of 2022, that $1 million practice.
Yep.
And so all of these things have to be done regularly on a daily basis to actually get us there.
Right.
Okay. Let's jump into the area of treatment for a moment.
Okay.
So if we're looking at, and you have a long time to decide this, but do I want to be a solo doctor? Do I want to be a group practice? Whatnot? You've got a good solid base of very close to 800 patients. You have a couple of options here, right? I can go like we're increasing our patient base and we're growing the practice. And in this case, we need to get to a point where you're almost doubling the patient base for you to have an associate on board, or you're reducing your time in the practice.
Right.
Okay. If I look at the productive side, to increase your production, I'd also like to have you thinking about the ways you can increase the dollar value of what you're diagnosing. So talk to me a little bit about procedures that you offer in this practice.
So I offer, mostly bread and butter dentistry. I do most of the extractions, and then I do root canals premolar forward. And I've started kind of looking at Invisalign a little bit, or clear aligner therapy, and that'll be one of the next points. But I don't do any molar endo. I don't place implants, and difficult thirds I don't tackle either. So
Okay.
basically bread and butter dentistry.
Mm-hmm. So increasing with Invisalign or other ways to look at tackling increasing the dollar value is could be a great road there also to meeting your goal.
Right.
Okay. Because it's not necessarily on volume at this point in time.
No.
And I mean, working on increasing the patient base at the same time as you work on what can we do to increase our productivity per patient.
Right.
And that's definitely going to happen also with perio, with fluoride on the hygiene side.
Yep.
But thinking about how to do that same thing on your side with some additional services and then a higher level of case acceptance.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are areas that are definitely going to also get you to meeting your goal.
Yeah, I definitely need to work on my case acceptance for sure.
Mm-hmm. In what way? Tell me. When you say I need to, that sounds like an adamant phrase. So, what
the reason
leads
I
you
say
to believe
that
that
is because I came from a community health clinic, not a traditional associateship, I guess, to where basically we were just doing things that were people would come out with, more bombed out teeth or super large decay that it was very obvious what they needed, and there wasn't much really talking about the treatment as far as things that people didn't necessarily, they weren't hurting, so they don't know that they need something. It was more along the lines of, I know this needs to be done, so it's going to get done kind of thing from where I came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do I have your permission to ask a tough question?
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. How comfortable are you with not just the obvious?
I'm working on that for sure. I've started diagnosing more along, with cracks and fractures in teeth on old amalgam fillings and things of that nature that aren't necessarily something that's giving the patient problems now, but will in the future. I've started working on that and trying to expand my diagnosing anyways to get better and find more value than what's just obvious.
Okay, I love that. So as you're working on that and you have a tool in the intraoral camera that helps you do that, right? Because it's like seeing is believing. And so having a patient be able to see exactly what you see helps them determine, the confidence level that you're sharing this recommendation. And then all of the other steps that we kind of talked about briefly with making sure that handoff is a powerful one, having someone there to do that treatment plan, and then that follow-up. That's something we haven't necessarily talked about that also happens at the front is should a patient say, I need to speak to my spouse about this, what happens? Currently, they probably leave and there's not much time, right? Not for lack of desire to do that, but it's more because she doesn't have time.
It gets pushed off for sure. Yes. More, not necessarily more important things, but more pressing things take precedent.
Absolutely. Well said. And so if we could also look at a way to follow up with outstanding treatment and make sure that that's done consistently, that there's actually a system in place to get that rolling. One of your assistants could definitely be someone that could help with that as well.
Right. Yep. I definitely have seen that if they don't schedule before they leave from their hygiene appointment, they're more than likely not going to be on the schedule in the future. At least what I've seen in the first 4 months of being here so far.
Exactly to the point of, when we coach this, it is all about when the coaches are delivering the actual system on this, it is sooner rather than later approach for sure. Because the minute the patient walks out the door, it's already reduced, right? In their mind, they're kind of on to something else already. And if a patient has said, you know what, I want to speak to my spouse about this, well, chances are they're going to speak to their spouse that day or the next day, and then it's kind of out of out of their
Right.
mind already. They're
Right.
thinking about all the other things they need to spend money on.
Right.
So I know this sounds, we've been using the word aggressive. I know this sounds a little aggressive, but we want to make sure we're following up pretty soon.
Right.
2 to 3 days, which definitely is something team members sometimes give me like these big round eyes on, like, are you
Right.
serious? I have to follow up pretty quick. Yes, follow up pretty quickly. Because again, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And so if we can impact that percentage as well and look at getting a higher level of case acceptance, then all of these things that we've talked about gets you to that magic
Right.
number.
Right. And I did have a question for you about the intraoral cameras. So I do take a picture whenever I'm saying, diagnosing a crown or something along those lines. The issue that I've found is showing the patient. We only have computers behind the chair. So in order to show the patient, I basically have to get them out of the chair and walk back to the computer with me, which just doesn't seem efficient to me. Or it seems almost like they lose interest whenever they're already out of the chair because they're planning on leaving rather than, still talking about their treatment. Do you think that would make a difference of maybe, I don't even know, getting an additional computer or getting even just an iPad or something that I could show the patient the pictures while they're in the chair?
How about monitors in front?
Yeah, I've thought of that also. Yeah.
Monitors. An iPad isn't my first choice.
Mine either, but it was just...
Something is better than nothing, but I'll tell you why
Exactly.
iPad isn't necessarily my first choice is because the idea is it's really, it's blown up on a bigger screen. And for the patient to be still sitting there looking at this tooth in such a large, like the tooth looks really ugly, really bad. That's something that the patient goes, oh gosh, let's get rid of that.
Okay. Yep.
Right. So I feel like you're absolutely right. There's something psychological about taking the bib off the patient or even having them get up out of the chair. Right. And they're already thinking, okay, it's done. I got to go. Yep. I'm half listening now. Exactly. But the captive audience is still, once they're sitting in the chair and you're able to point out certain things as they're looking just, through your eyes, basically into this large screen that shows all of the areas that you're discussing. Right. So I would say that's something to invest in immediately.
Yeah. Okay.
Sooner rather than later, right?
As with everything. Yep.
Yeah. Now, again, I'm reminding you about this is a goal that you set.
I know.
Right?
I know.
So here are the step-by-step things that have to be done to get us there.
I understand.
Okay. Now, on the hygiene side, that per patient visit is on the low side right now because we don't have all of the other services that we should have. Right. So you want to see that bumping up as well. So all of these areas are really looking at impacting production. Yeah. But there's some expenses that are going to need to happen as well.
Right.
Right? Don't be afraid of doing that because those investments, monitor, team members, time, all of those things that you're going to be investing going forward are definitely going to get you closer to hitting that goal of yours.
Yep.
Absolutely. Any other questions for me?
That was really the only one that I had so far. Well, the assistant one that I asked earlier, but that was it, really.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for being our guest today on Practice Underwater. And like I said, I was serious about having you back on in a couple of months when you have the hygienist on board and we can talk about taking things to the next step.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you again, everyone, for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you back next week.
All right. Hope you enjoyed part 2 and that conclusion with Brandon and Suzanne. I'm back with Alex. Alex, you tell me, where do we start?
I really liked the picture that Suzanne painted of what Brandon's practice can look like in the very near future, because so much of Brandon's difficulties stem directly from the fact that he cannot find a hygienist in his neck of the woods. We don't know exactly where he is. We know he's someplace rural, and it's hard to attract team members where he is located. He's fortunate to have found a new grad hygienist that wants to start as soon as she gets her license. So that's going to allow his patient flow to immediately almost double, to go from 1 column of treatment to 2 columns, with one being the hygienist. And Suzanne hits the nail on the head with how important it is to utilize the opportunity he's being given to create that hygiene program from scratch, to get off on the right foot. He's got a blank slate as far as the hygiene program goes, because right now he's probably only has time to do bloody prophies, x-rays, and next. So he has the chance now to set it up for success in the long haul. Because he can sit down and say, what's our perio protocol? When do we recommend fluoride? When do we do sealants? How frequently are we taking x-rays? What type of insurance verification do we want to do for adjunct services like night guards? There's so much opportunity here to use hygiene not only as a great service to patients and actually render a higher quality of care, but also use it as more of a revenue booster for the practice, because hygiene doesn't have to be a loss leader. That's another industry standard thing that's batted around that we at Shared Practices love to really shoot arrows in, because we know that it's not true. Hygiene can be a great boon to the practice. And with Brandon's opportunity to have a new hygienist to co-create what that hygiene program looks like, that's going to be something that a year from now he's going to think back to, oh my gosh, how did I do bloody prophies myself for 4 or 6 months before the new hygienist got here? So seeing the opportunities there was one of my favorite parts of the episode.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to talk staff shortages just in general for a second here, because I think this is something that everyone in the industry is kind of dealing with. And I don't know, Alex, if you have had to hire recently, if you have any maybe outside the box ideas for people that may be dealing with a similar, like, I just can't find anyone, the simple putting it on Indeed just isn't working anymore. Any other strategies people could use?
Yeah. Well, I'm more rural than most people. So sometimes you have to get creative. And I've gone to my existing team members, like the ones that are like my all-stars, and I've said, like, look, go to church, go to your kids' sporting events, people that you know in the community that you like being around, that would be good cultural fits. See if they want a job, like for front office, for example, or somebody that would be willing to be trained to be a dental assistant. Hygiene is a little tougher because you have, the certification that you have to achieve, but attaching a sign-on bonus, being smart about what types of incentives you're offering to your team. Do you do 401k? Do you do health insurance? Do you have paid time off? What can you do to make yourself competitive? Because the hourly matters, but if someone wants to work in the city and you're situated 30 minutes outside the city, there's got to be something alluring to that position. What are your hours? Are they flexible? What's your work environment like? Do you like to have fun? Do you like to cut up? Like in my most recent posting for an associate, like in the first couple of lines, I talk about like our office culture, and like we like to have fun, we like to laugh, we like to joke, we like to kid around to make the day go by faster, because you spend as much time with your work family as you do your family at home. So being intentional about painting a clear picture of what that person stands to gain by coming under your employ is key. But yeah, it's no secret, being rural has its challenges, and especially with staffing. So sometimes your staff overhead is going to be higher rural, because you just have to pay a little bit of a premium to retain people.
I love that you said that. And it's something people don't think about often. They post the dry ad. It's just job requirements, and here's the hourly and all that. And there's nothing in there that makes your ad stand out versus any others. And I just think it's like anything else is, the pool of applicants for different procedures has gone down. So it's now more competitive. So you have to do more to stand out. And I love all of that. That's great. And I think for me, the only the strategy that has worked for me is, asking staff members if they know any others. Most of them have worked in plenty of different offices, probably temped in places, have friends, have colleagues that they can reach out to. And, sorry, other dentists in my area, but I have no problem poaching an employee from another office. So just throwing that out there.
No, to the victor go the spoils. I mean, it's capitalism. If you offer a better service and you offer a better place to work, like people are going to flock to you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like poaching, and I guess to some degree, depending on where you're standing, it is poaching. But if you're offering a better place to work, like that's what the market desires.
Yeah, exactly. Next, I wanted to move on to the case acceptance part, because I think Suzanne gets into a really interesting dynamic with Brandon that is really just common to every dentist, right? Like, we all start in school treating a certain type of patient with a certain type of insurance, say, and at some point in our careers, we, most of us, not all of us, exit to a more private practice environment. What some people continue it on into residency, some people do associate jobs at Medicaid offices. So certain people may continue a little longer, but it's at some point for most, there is a transition point. And they get into a really, difficult part of that. And he's still early on, just a few months out of it, of like, how do I now switch, the way I present treatment and the way I diagnose to someone who doesn't have the same concerns as the people I've always known to treat. And that really needs to be intentional in your mind to know the difference. I know for me, when I came out of residency and started my private practice job, I was very conscious about, I wasn't going to, present things in the same way, because things like money might not be as much of a concern to these new people as they might have been. They may choose to electively have procedures done that may not have existed in the past, just whatever insurance would cover. So for you, I know I think you did an associate job at kind of more of this mill type environment. So how did you kind of escape that mindset for yourself?
So much of it stems from getting comfortable being uncomfortable, having those conversations centering around what the best option is. Don't feel like you have to limit what you present to people just because you assume they don't value it or you assume that they can't afford it. People talk every day about how some of their biggest, most fun cases to do come on people that don't necessarily look like they have two pennies to rub together. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you owe it to your patients to be thorough in your case presentation and to leave no stone unturned. And I think with Brandon, it's that idea of feeling confident in his diagnosis. And I think one thing too, thinking back to in my less experienced days, just being consistent and diagnosing the same thing on the same situation every time. Like, it's really easy to see like a fracture on a tooth, and depending on your relationship with the patient, or depending on if you had to do a crown on the patient last year, it's really easy to say, oh, we'll keep an eye on that, or oh, we'll do a filling there, when in fact it's healthier and better, and it takes less mental gymnastics to just have a clear-cut plan of attack. If the tooth presents this way, this is what I recommend. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. And honestly, like, Matt, you're humble enough to not say this, but you're probably like the resident expert at having that mindset and about being formulaic and methodical about how you approach it. Like, what would you say to Brandon, knowing that he came from that public health type background where case acceptance was, near 100%? What would you say to him to help make his approach a little bit more streamlined?
I think at some point the light, flipped on for me, that it was just myself getting in my own way. Either like you said, I didn't want to have the conversation, or, I made assumptions about their financial status or their willingness to do a certain thing that, the times that I did escape that and offer it and was told no, that kind of stopped me from doing in the future, because I didn't want to be rejected, and like fear of it's all based on fear, really. And at some point, it's really just a conscious decision to not do that anymore. I saw what it was costing me. I saw that my schedule was more open in my private practice job than I wanted to, and I decided to do the things that I could to make that not be the case. I think for Brandon, it's going to be doubly important, given that he's having a hygienist start right out of school. So not only does he not have co-diagnosis going on right now, it might not be going on, unless he does something about it when this new person starts, because she's probably not going to be used to that dynamic. So I think for him, it's very much he needs to feel more confident in his diagnosis, like you said, what to do when, get that super clear so he can pass that on to new hygienists starting, and then definitely use Suzanne's suggestion of get the giant screen right in front of the patient, keep them in the chair. I love how she said when they leave the chair, they stop thinking about dentistry. That's so on point. It's totally true. But when they're in the chair, they are still present, most times about, what's going on. So
yeah, and another piece to tack onto that is when it's you one-on-one with the patient for an hour, where's the handoff? Like you're making the handoff directly to the front office team member to go over the treatment plan for whatever you recommend. But I think there's a lot of value to be had from hygienists seating the patient, assessing chief complaints, doing a once over of the teeth, taking intraoral photos, showing the patient the x-rays, showing the patient the intraoral photos. Normally, Dr. So-and-so recommends this. When this happens, I'm going to have him take a look, blah, 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 blah. So the patient is hearing it multiple times from multiple sources. The hygienist rehashes it when the doctor comes in the room. The doctor talks about it. So by then they've heard it 3 times. And I don't know, it's taken a lot more as gospel when they hear it that way than just like you saying, oh, looks like there's this issue going on. Like it has a lot more credibility when you hear it from multiple sources.
For sure. And you need to put aside any ethical negative feelings about this kind of stuff when it comes to case acceptance. Like we are treating people who don't have the same knowledge that we do. And so we have to use strategies to convince them to get what we know is best for them. And like, if you come from that place, you just have way less judgment about it all. So I think a lot of doctors get tripped up kind of in that arena, just judging and negatively feeling about these ways we have to use to convince people. Because, in a lot of ways, a patient will trust a hygienist more than a doctor. They'll kind of view them as, oh, this person doesn't have any incentive really to, scam me or whatever. So that when the value is built up so much by the hygienist and the doctor just confirms that, it's even more likely to get a schedule out of it.
Yeah, and it's going to be cool to see because Suzanne was big on getting Brandon back for a follow-up episode, in a few months, and I'd love to hear how that process goes of him onboarding the hygienist, getting her acclimated to that methodology of co-diagnosing, and seeing what kind of headway he's able to make and getting more treatment on the books. And subsequent to that, too, I mean, obviously there's the issue with his staffing at large, like not just in the hygiene realm, but also regarding like front office being spread too thin, having only a part-time dental assistant, not even a full-time dental assistant. What did you think about Suzanne's treatment plan as far as the hiring goes? I loved how she laid that out.
No, I loved it too. I think for Brandon, what's really going to make the difference is he, for the next several months, needs to stop looking at his accountant reports and looking at his bank account to see how much he made that month. And definitely should not look at percentages of anything really. Like if he ignores all that and just focuses on investing in the practice to grow it. So that's marketing and that's humans and staff. And then obviously tightening up the systems that Suzanne's talking about here, and ideally signing up for SP coaching to see him along the way. I mean, that's going to make the most difference. So like, I know it's the hardest thing to do and something that I have struggled with since I've owned the practice of not taking the incentive to make money each month out of there, making enough to live, but being okay with whatever comes. That's going to make the difference ultimately. So if he can do that, he's set up for success.
Well, because it's hard to look at that accountant report and see that you're in the red zone because you're at 31% staff overhead because you just hired someone to help you grow.
Can they not do that? Can they not do the stupid red, green for each thing? I'm going to tell my accountant to stop doing that. That is really bugging me.
Yeah, it sets off like an alarm in your brain, and I think it's definitely well intentioned, but it can have adverse consequences as it relates to being comfortable with this type of growth. Because George always calls this ugly duckling stage, and Brandon's going to have the ugliest of ducklings for a little while as he's adding full-time hygienist. He's going to be adding full-time dental assistant. He's going to transition part-time dental assistant to being a floater between front and back. And Suzanne's fond of saying that, floaters aren't the best idea, but like she said in this episode, it's a stopgap until he gets busier and can transition that part-time person to either fully a dental assistant or fully up front, because you got to have some support up front to be able to answer the phone, follow up on treatment, reactivate patients that you paid a premium for when you bought the practice. Like there's so many things that that need to happen with that front office team that you just can't do with one person, even in a smaller practice like this. There's too many things to juggle.
Yeah. I mean, he needs to see himself as he's in a growth phase for the next while. And there'll be a time where he can look at his expenses and see what's out of line, but that's when he's in his next plateau, say. So we're not completely discounting that, but when you're in a growth, you're investing in your practice, and ultimately that will pay him off so much over time than incrementally doing it slowly when he can, just like afford it. I don't know. Like it'll just pay off so much more to being a bit more aggressive, and he has an aggressive goal, so that would be in line with that.
Well, he's on board. He's on board with busting butt for the next 6 months to hunker down and grow the practice, build in some infrastructure, and then hopefully open the floodgates of profit. Suzanne pointed out how there's two main ways to grow a practice. You could do it by increasing that volume of patients that you see, like just the sheer number of people that come through your doors, or increasing the size of treatment plans. And she astutely pointed out, well, you could do both. Like you could, at the same time you're getting that hygienist, you could get more comfortable diagnosing so that you're growing on two fronts rather than just getting more people through the door and diagnosing the same way. I mean, it's no secret that like with my office, we're big on hygiene. Like close to a third of our revenue in our practice comes from hygiene because we focus on being thorough with our periodontal diagnosis, talking about fluoride, talking about sealants, desensitizers. I mean, there's lots of things you can do in hygiene to educate people, render better service, and at the same time, just make your practice a little less person proof. Because think about it, you have a practice with one hygienist and that hygienist quits. That changes the whole complexion of the practice. If you grow to the point where you have two full-time hygienists and one quits, yeah, it's a thorn in your side, but it doesn't drastically adjust your day as the doctor. Like Brandon is so doctor dependent. He makes these moves, he hires these people, then all of a sudden he is able to share the load and he's not having to toil by himself thanklessly like he's been doing. But I just have to commend him on his mindset because he's able to stay resolute and stay motivated in spite of the difficulties. And I can't wait to see where he ends up.
Yeah, me too. I hope he reaches out, and I'll just finally add that his whole experience of being at this office will be drastically different in a good way when he's appropriately staffed, and his days will just be much easier than I'm sure it is now, as he's probably running around a bit. So yes, please reach out, Brandon. We'll hopefully talk to him in a few months. And thank you, Alex, for your thoughts today. And we'll see everyone next week on another episode of Practice Underwater.